Welcome to the Cosmic Pie Podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Barkhouse, and here with me is.
Robert Moore.
So, Robert, this is episode 2, or episode 5, season 2.
Five, yeah. No,
So, we're already 5 into the new year.
that's it. Yay, cruising along.
Yeah, it goes fast, doesn't it?
It does.
Now, we are broadcasting live from the campus of the University of North Dakota here in Grand Forks, North Dakota. If you have any questions or comments during the podcast, please use the live chat function. It's one of those days, Robert.
It is.
So I'll
It
get
is.
you to say the disclaimer.
Okay, so the opinions expressed today are going to be those of myself, Wayne, and our guest, and then they're not necessarily the opinions or ideas of the university, the Department of Physics and Astrophysics, or the College of Arts and Sciences. So there we go.
Yeah, so speaking of our guests, I'm happy to introduce Sadie Bone. Sadie, you want to say hi?
Hi. Like Dr. Barkhouse said, I am Sadie Bone. I'm an undergraduate physics student here at UND. I'm in my 4th year, but I don't graduate until next year. And I work under Dr. Barkhouse, getting my feet into some research.
Okay,
So-
my microphone is cutting out. I'm sold. Okay.
So one of the things we're going to explore today, of course, I like to explore a little bit, is kind of your interest, Sadie, and how you became, involved in physics and astronomy to begin with. So do you want to give us an idea maybe at an early time when you thought that maybe science is the thing you'd like to pursue for a career?
Yeah, actually, it's a cute little story, actually. I like to think myself definitely as one of those people that are the exception and not the rule of how they figure out, how do you want to do what you want to do when you grow up. I I grew up in Butte, Montana, where there is even less to do than there is in North Dakota. And so I, would watch birds fly and think to myself, how can they fly and how can I make humans fly? The very stereotypical child thing. And after a few days of jumping off of fences, I hurt myself. And I was laid up one day, and in Montana at the time they would play PBS on the free TV channels. PBS is the public broadcasting system, if nobody knows. And so, um, on a very specific episode of PBS, they were actually discussing the laws of Newton and his laws of motion, but most specifically the first law of motion, the law that states that bodies at rest will tend to stay at rest unless acted upon by an external force. And 6-year-old me thought that was stupid and that I was going to prove Sir Isaac Newton wrong. And so I sat on my floor for I think it was like an hour, and then I got up and I was like, wow, maybe Newton is right about something. What else am I wrong about? And so it kind of just started this chain reaction of events that I, now in hindsight recognize were just tiny little science experiments trying to figure out what made everything work. And then in high school, I kept following that. I did a lot of chemistry, I did a lot of physics, and chemistry is cool, and mathematics is certainly cool, but at, at the core of each of those is really physics. Um, and so I decided to come to UND, try to explore purely physics. And then Dr. Barkhouse kidnapped me into the astrophysics kind of track, and now I'm I've set my life up to try and understand the physics with stars and celestial mechanics, basically.
So, Sadie, when you were growing up, let's say in Butte, Montana, as you mentioned, did you have an opportunity to see the sky without light pollution in the way, or at least a minimal amount of light pollution?
Yeah, I so growing up in Butte, there is still a considerable amount of light pollution, but my family was very large into hunting and camping, and it doesn't take too long to get out and away from the city lights in Montana, and we would go into like the Ruby Mountains where you can actually see the band of the Milky Way through the sky. And whenever I'd, go to some family out on the Big Hole River, um, I would get to see those stars. And I don't necessarily think you could see the band of the Milky Way that close to the Big Hole because it runs through cities. But um, very distinctly remember the first time I actually decided to look up while we were hiking into a hunting spot and seeing the band of the Milky Way because you go out there at 4 in the morning, and once I like looked up, I was just like blown away. Those are actual things above me, and I can see them. Can I do science experiments on those? So yeah,
Yes, yes, you can.
You know, it
you
really,
can.
I mean, that brings up the fact that there is a significant percentage of this country's population, especially those that live in the east along the eastern seaboard, for example, that never ever would see the Milky Way. It's just too much light pollution. In fact, east of the Mississippi, if you look on satellite
Uh,
images of the United States during the night, the light pollution is unreal. I mean, it's,
I was going to comment that when my children visited out here the first time, ended up taking them out to where our observatory is because they'd never seen the Milky Way. And, we've lived in, what is it, Bortle scale 3 or worse since they've been born.
now you
So-
mentioned that, so what does that mean to people who are listening and don't know what
Bor-
you're talking
Okay,
about?
Bortle scale is a scale that basically uh, uh, represents how bright the sky is. So 0 is, if I'm remembering it correctly, 0 is completely dark. There's no lights no glow even along the horizon. Yeah, that's something you don't find anymore unless you're like in Antarctica. And it goes all the way up to 10, I think,
Something like that, yeah.
which is you're standing underneath the street light and can't even see the brightest of stars. You barely see the moon. So Wondergoon does ask us a question, but do you still want to make humans fly?
You know, I loved the idea of flying as a kid. I'm now terrified of airplanes, and I can't imagine thinking of a way to fly. Um, in the context of can we make people fly in the cosmos, I I would be probably the first person to volunteer my life to either testing a prototype of just being like flown out into the stars never to return, or to work on, you know, uh, space aviation. I would, even though my research interest is in celestial mechanics, I would love to do something like that. That would be very fun.
And Mizuho Schwam asks, how about Lavina, Montana? I visited there last fall. The night sky was gorgeous.
I've been near around Lavina multiple times, and you, as c- what's the word, cliche as it is, that there I have yet to find another sky like the Montana sky, and I that's probably why they call it Big Sky Country.
Big sky country, yep.
Yeah, I know where
It's very beautiful.
I know where I live in the southern part of Grand Forks. You can't see the Milky Way, but you can almost see it. It's getting pretty close. So you only have to go outside our city just a little bit, like a couple miles or so, and you can easily see the Milky
Right.
Way.
Yeah. I do know you can see the aurora if you just go a little bit outside of where we're at.
Well, I've seen
Yeah.
aurora from my backyard.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, we've getting some very bright aurora once in a while. And
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
you can definitely easily see it in the middle of the city here.
Yeah. It's too bad the M-class flare that exploded off the sun just a few days ago wasn't pointed at us. So.
Well, you know what would happen, Robert? It would be cloudy that night, anyways.
Oh, right.
That's kind
This
of what
great
happens, right?
celestial event. And it's cloudy.
But yeah, but getting back to the light pollution part of thing, unless you go like camping, right, with your parents or other people, and get out away from the city lights and be able to see what a dark sky looks like, a lot of people just haven't experienced that.
Mm. They look up at the night sky and wonder what we're talking about, to be honest.
Well, I always thought, you talk to people who are especially observational astronomers, ones that go off and use telescopes, especially optical telescopes, that passion was instilled into them at an early age when they did go camping or spend the summers in cottages or
Yeah.
something away from the city lights.
I think I'm one of the few that can't say that.
Yeah.
So, but my path to the thing was to science and astronomy and observations was a bit weirder than even Sadie's story. So maybe we'll discuss that sometime, but not today.
So I guess Sadie, planning to be an astronaut is not in your future. Is that correct to say that? If you're scared of flying.
Uh, I've read multiple books, notably Chris Hadfield's An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, about what it takes to become an astronaut. And I just think that my interests lie more in research and improving quality of education on Earth as opposed to very like rigorous training. And um, I've seen and I've read about some of the training scenarios that they put you through, like simulating a fire on the International Space Station that's going out of control, and you have to eliminate like a panic response from yourself. I just don't think that I'd be one of the people that are built like that. To be honest with you, but if I was a person like that, then I if I could have the opportunity to, you know, go into to be at say like the ISS and to look out of the hub window and to see the true unadulterated night sky, but to see the celestial sphere without any atmospheric um, interference, I think that would also just be amazing.
Now that would be the cupola or something,
The
isn't that what it's
cupola,
called?
yeah, yeah,
But I think this doing a spacewalk would be the ultimate thing
Oh my
yeah.
because
god.
there you can orient yourself, if you have time, into different directions, and therefore look directly out, at the Milky
Hmm.
Way and that kind of stuff. And there's nobody there; you're just by yourself, and all you're doing is
Right.
hearing maybe, you know,
And
voices in your head when you're talking to mission control or other astronauts,
and
and that's about it.
then I'm the weirdo among us because it's like nope, no desire because I'll strap myself onto 3 million tons of high explosives and launch myself, but I know what it takes to calculate a reentry, and there ain't no way I'm doing reentry.
Well, you forgot to put the other part of that. You strap yourself on how many million? Would you say
I said 3 million, but yeah,
built by the lowest
built by the lowest bidder, right?
to the government, right?
Like a certain movie I won't mention, where the guy just starts wailing on the machine, on the engines, is like, Soviet parts, American parts, all built in Taiwan.
Oh, I was thinking of Armageddon. I think that
That
movie.
was the
Was that the
movie.
movie? Yeah.
That's the movie.
Where the Russian was on the space station, right? Yes, right.
Russian parts, American parts, all made in Taiwan.
Yeah,
Uh,
so then you don't want to get sick when you're in your spacesuit outside floating around, and because that would kill you, right?
yeah.
So that's not a good way to die.
No.
Yeah.
Nope. Nope.
Well, Sadie, of course, there's lots to do here on the Earth. You don't need to go into space to further your career if you don't want to. And one of the things that we try to even up, if you like, is the participation of not only men in science, and in physics, of course, generally it's been almost nearly 100%
Yeah.
men, a male involvement, if you like, but also try to tilt the table a little bit more the other way to get more of female participation in science, in particular in physics and astronomy and astrophysics. Would you like to say some things about that? Say, I know you've been involved in some things related to that directly.
Yeah, so there's actually it definitely in the time that I've been in university, and it's probably, well, I know for a fact that started it started about 18 years ago. Uh the American Physical Society, which is more commonly known as APS, um has started making a push for more women entering the space of physics, alongside their male counterparts. And so one of the I actually just recently went to an event which is called the Conference for Undergraduate Women in Physics. It is a um, initiative basically to connect undergraduate women, um, and get them not only to realize that, even though you might be the only girl or your woman in your physics department at home, um, there are others out there, and it's, um, at the local level it might seem like there's a really big issue, like, oh, like for myself, as an example, I'm the only woman in my graduating class, and so it seems like at the local level it's very very lonely, and so APS brings regions of colleges together, to help students realize that they're not alone, and they're not alone in their struggles of just like being the only woman in the room. um, but they also help connect these young students with industry leaders and professors, um, graduate students especially, and there is conferences that happen once a year, I believe, specifically dedicated to that. Um, they happen in January, and at the one, I can only speak to the one that I went to this year, and the one that I went to last year in Iowa. This year it was held in Bozeman, Montana, only a few hours away from Butte, and there were multiple just amazing panels that APS put on of addressing mental health stigmas in science in general, but especially physics. What do science careers look like outside of academia? Because an astounding amount of people don't know that you can get a physics degree and not get a PhD and become just a professor to teach other people. There's a lot of, you know, researching jobs with
Yeah.
national laboratories and things like that, and they also have information sessions on, how do you effectively communicate research? How do you effectively network with people? How can you um, um, how can you work on these areas in your life? And then they also give you the opportunity to do that. They allow you to go and give research talks and to give poster presentations to these other people. And so it's a very positive feedback loop that APS creates in 3 days, start to finish, but one very intensive day of information sessions and keynote speakers, and it's a positive feedback loop that personally I can speak to and say that it has a lot of effect, um, in how I've moved forward in my life. I went to my first APS uh, conference, the QWIP conference, as it's called, last year, and I was absolutely terrified. I was at the point, my third year in my degree, and I was terrified. I felt so alone that I didn't. I was in an awkward stage where I couldn't relate to any of the younger women in the department, and there were only two other girls who were older than me, and I didn't know that they had existed until that day, or not that day, but that year. And so, um, it was amazing to hear other women who are successful in the field, who have their PhD, talk about on what is unfortunately the same situations that I was going through with sexism and, you know, just feeling like I was really alone and I couldn't do it, and to see them be successful and to be like, oh wow, I can actually do that. And so I have the APS QWIP conference to thank for my current initiative at UND of starting an APS Women in Physics group, um, and founding, kind of an inclusive environment where even if there are students who aren't able to make it to those conferences that can be so enriching, because the university can only send so many people, that we can work all throughout the year to try and bring those same types of opportunities to not only just the women in the department of physics and astrophysics, but to also have that outreach to other women who are just on campus in other male dominated fields that feel so alone. And so APS has just been phenomenal for me. And I've talked to the other participants that went with me this year. they also said that it was highly impactful, that they felt like they learned a lot, that they were most importantly, seen. And so um, I know that you guys have an infographic that QWIP has actually, they have data, which as scientists we love to work in data. There is data out there that show that the attendance for QWIP has kind of skyrocketed in the past few years. Uh, granted, the infographic does include the uh, COVID, and they
Yeah.
did have virtual in things to uh, attend, but they were much less popular because the the screen, it doesn't help with the that feeling of loneliness, and it was just a time of high stress. But if you omit like um, the time of COVID, there's a huge uptick in people finding out about these things and also going, and that the APS was also able to show that because they are putting these things on and bringing these opportunities to women in the field, that they've awarded um, more physics degrees because of it, which is amazing. I mean, you would assume as much, but it's just amazing to actually have numerical data that tells you that you know we're having a good impact on people's lives, and it is amazing, and I love it.
Now, Sadie, not to get personal, so
Hmm. No,
taking
you're
away
go ahead.
names and all of that out of it. Have you ever felt either through let's start at the beginning, if you remember all back in elementary school, through middle school, high school, and then into university, have you ever felt discriminated against as a female and maybe suggesting you have a like in science, whether it's physics or astronomy or whatever, that somehow had the feeling that maybe you shouldn't go that route because you are female and for no other reason at all?
Yeah, I never had that much of resistance, say in like grade school up to grade 6. But to be fair, I was extremely interested in mathematics at the time. And when I got into middle school, that's when I learned about this really, you know, kind of cool thing called string theory. And I just went crazy on it. And I absolutely loved it. Um, and I was just couldn't get enough of physics and the string theory, and especially like the theories of relativity and how they connected to cosmology, well, what I know now as cosmology and celestial mechanics and things such as that. And I had an opportunity in middle school um, to have a self-guided project, and so what I did is I actually wrote a paper on the theories of relativity and how I envisioned that they could help us escape the heat death of the universe. Um, Granted, what I know now, it's kind of a stretch. We could work on that theory a little bit. My theory, not the theories of relativity. Um, and of course, at the time, my teachers didn't accept printed papers, so it was all handwritten. It was 28 pages.
Oh my.
28 pages. It was crazy, but I had so much fun writing it. And I gave it to the teacher that I had trusted the most at the time and I looked up to. He was a teacher that kind of helped me deepen my understanding of physical sciences. And I gave it to him, and he just looked at it very like disappointingly and flipped through it, and he's like, this is impressive, but the only issue is that women don't go into physics, and you should find a real job like nursing. And I, after that, I was very torn because when you're that young, you're very impressionable, and so I thought I had to give up physics. I really did. Um, and I found out my senior year when I had was accepted to UND and everything. It was actually that teacher's last year. He saw me in the hallway as I was talking about what physics classes I'm going to be studying at UND the next year, and he felt the need to tell me. again, that I was doing it, making a dumb decision, but also that he keeps my report so that he can tell other people what not to do and don't do something stupid like be a girl going into physics. And so, hey, somebody just came home, and I'm so sorry.
That's
I,
okay.
I wanted this
okay.
not to happen.
No, keep going. It's
Um,
okay.
so I was like, wow, that's really wrong. And
Yes,
thankfully
yes,
that
it is.
that teacher, he doesn't work there anymore. He's gone off and disappeared somewhere, hopefully where he's, figured out that people can go into physics. Physics isn't an archaic degree by any stretch of the imagination, and that women are perfectly capable of doing such. And I've only ever had, I'd say, one or two experiences at UND, unfortunately, that where it's been in, I've never been insinuated, hey, uh, you shouldn't be here because you're a girl, verbally. But when I was in my, what would that be, my sophomore year of physics, I was taking my modern 3 physics class, and I actually had a male um, classmate right before class tried to intimidate me out of going to the test, I think it was that day, by punching me in the back of the head. Um, and I was, thankfully UND is extremely supportive of students who are going through things. And so the university, supported me 100% and helped me get out of that situation. But unfortunately, it has happened. And the people who were at APS, they also, um, there was someone who had said they had a professor pull them into their office and say, I've taken the liberty of pulling your transcript, and I think that you should be making a much different decision because obviously you don't have the capabilities. And so while my um, while my experiences weren't as severe as some other experiences that I've had, it explained to me, um, they're all, valid with those types of things. Um, and I do look back on them sometimes when I, you know, am stressed out. Like, oh man, are these people like, are they right? Are they right about me? But then it's going back, even to like the APS stuff where you have strong leaders say, hey, actually that's not how it needs to be. And that's what keeps me going. So
Unfortunately, you talk about your experience in K 12. I mean, a lot of that is people don't say anything, right? Like when it happens to individuals, I think, based on what I see, they don't make that known.
Right.
A lot of it is
mm,
hidden. And there can be, you mentioned one person, but there can be a lot of those.
A
So
lot
it's
of
not just,
those, yeah.
oh, this person is retired, thankfully, but unfortunately, there's probably lots and lots of them throughout the country and around the world, basically, on that.
And it's wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
and that student, you know, that's just uncalled for.
I mean, that's the thing
yeah,
about going to college, right? Is that you get out of the bulliness, you hope, of what you may or may
Right.
not experience when you're in K 12, whether it's in high school, middle school, whatever. That by the time you get to college, people are mature enough, should I say, that that's foolishness just doesn't exist. But unfortunately,
It still does.
it still does. Maybe not to the same degree, I
Right.
guess, as in high school or middle school. I don't know. I haven't seen numbers or studies done on this.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask somebody, would you rather teach at the university level or at the high school level? Sometimes they'll say at the university level because I don't want to put up with the foolishness at the high school level from the students, the misbehavior.
I know of someone who she got her
And
PhD in
Robert, you can
astronomy.
speak to this
Yeah.
directly because you want to tell the audience your experience.
Well, I was just going to say that, yeah, I know of at least one young lady who quit astronomy for good because of the what she experienced when she got finished with her degree and moved out into postdocs and everything. So unfortunately, it still goes on. It's still there. But I don't know. Maybe you had a different story in mind.
No, I was just thinking of your experience, teaching high school.
Oh, yeah. I've had only taught for 3 years, but yeah, I had plenty of the young girls come up and start talking with me about, or young ladies, start talking about how they were discouraged at home from, yeah, oh, it's math. You're a girl. You're supposed to have a hard time with that. It's like, no, you're not. You're a human being. You're inherently good at math. You've just been told that you're not.
And then, unfortunately, that's why we try to change things. People, us in society, the average person knows what's going on now because people come forward and tell their stories.
Right.
And so you can see a push like the Hidden Figures movie
Mm-hmm.
to emphasize that it was females had a big impact to play on the Apollo program, for example.
Right.
And there's been other things, of course, that's been brought forward. And until those stories come out, a lot of people just don't know, right?
Well, I think we've mentioned it before, but up until about the 60s, when people talked about computers, they were talking about the room full of ladies in the basement that were busy doing all the calculations. So where this idea that women aren't good in math came from, I have no idea, but
And a classic example of that, I think we spoke about this last podcast, was the Harvard College Observatory in Pickering.
right.
And the use of females to do all of the calculation. Think of the spectral classification that was done for stars initially
Mm-hmm.
with anti-jump cannon and
Any
many
jump
others.
cannon, right.
So,
So this is not new, and it's a shame that it's still going on.
one of the things, Sadie, that's been promoted and that's been instituted in a lot of different areas I notice is when it comes to receiving awards like grants from the federal government or receiving observing time, that a lot of time this is done now. This is the big push to make it a completely double-blind type of submission process where you just don't know who are the individuals that are proposing for an award or for observing proposal, whatever. You just read about what they want to do, the science. So that gives you a less biased opinion when you go to review these type of situations, these proposals, from the point of view where you only can see the science. You can't not know who is the person proposing. So there's always an argument, for example, that the well-established astronomers would give guaranteed time on the Hubble Space Telescope, not because they're at an institution that paid the money to get that guaranteed time, but I'm talking about time as open time, open access time that anybody can propose, and that these individuals were almost guaranteed to get their proposal accepted, irregardless, in a way, of the science, but rather who they are, rather than what they were proposing.
Well, anything they did, they've got a career on this stuff. Anything they do has got to be good stuff. Come on.
Yeah. And so that even goes for, federal grants. You're talking about grants from different agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we've gone down this road, which is, I think, a much better way of doing things, is to not know who the individual or individuals are, but to judge the proposal based on the actual science itself, rather than the people that do the proposal or are proposing. Now, some people would argue, because I'm a career established person, I do know what I am doing, and
Right.
expertise does count for a lot of things. That's still there, but it's not a main part of the judging process. The review process is based on the proposed science, the
Right.
scientific justification of what you propose. All these other things are eventually brought in, but it's not the main thrust.
Right.
And
Exactly.
when that was started, like for the Hubble Space Telescope, if I'm not mistaken, that's been relatively recently. And I know of an individual that was an undergraduate student in our department, a female, who went on to graduate school, who actually got awarded Hubble Space Telescope time.
Cool.
Now, whether or not this was a factor involved, this double-blind type of process, is the reason why she got time, or she would have got time anyways, just because the science was just so good. I don't know the results of that. I don't know the statistics behind that. But it's nice to see that individuals, whether they're well-established career scientists or just beginning, are getting
Right.
time on these major facilities like the Hubble Space Telescope. And,
Right.
of course, that would propagate to the James Webb Space Telescope and so on.
One would hope.
One would hope.
Yeah,
Oh,
that actually The double blind process is, I think it's a huge step forward. And that actually reminds me of something I heard at the APKINS conference this year is that um, it was a representative from APS talking about, the initiatives behind how do we level the playing field of publication and for observation times and things like that. Um, and they said something that has really stuck with me, and you just reminded me, and it's the saying that um, oh, of course not. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna forget or mess it up. It's that physics becomes truly will become equal when the average woman is afforded the same grace as the average man,
Mhm.
and in mathematics, or in recollection, or in observation,
Mhm.
or in scientific justification. And I really do appreciate the push for the double blind anonymity of that, because I feel like that is one of the biggest pushes that I've seen in my lifetime, or that I've heard other people say that in their lifetime that they've seen in the trying to level the playing field without, based on something that is truly um, non-specific to gender, age, or expertise is your scientific justification, because your rigor as a scientist doesn't depend on any of those things. And
Right.
so I think that that's truly just an amazing thing.
When I was much younger, when I kind of thought about these issues, right? You read or
Mhm.
hear about it in the media or whatever it is, or somebody mentions things to you. I always thought science was one of those things where it didn't matter, right? It didn't
Right.
matter how
You're
high
right.
you are. It doesn't
Yep.
matter how tall you are. It doesn't matter how much you weigh, right? It
Right.
doesn't matter the color of your skin or your body parts. You're doing science. It's totally, if you like, neutral in that sense. Doesn't matter if you're a construction worker and you need to carry around iron beams all day long and tie them together and put in bolts and stuff. Yeah, you have to have the muscle to do that type of work, right?
Right.
Or you need to reach heights, right? You have to be a tall enough person to be able to handle it. So physical aspects come into play. But science is totally neutral. In fact, you can think of Stephen Hawking doing wonderful science and look at the condition that he
Mhm.
was in most of his life,
Right.
And yet when you hear stories about the fact, oh, you can't do science or you shouldn't go in science because of different things, right?
Right.
That's some attribute of yourself. It's just mind-boggling when you think about it. But unfortunately, as people would tell me, yet doing science itself, the conduct of science is a human activity.
Right.
And anytime you say that or think of that along that way, it's a human activity, then you get into the negative side of judgment.
Mhm.
For example, if you go to school, and let's just pick on, I don't know, middle school, okay?
Okay.
And everybody was exactly the same color of skin.
Mhm.
Everybody was the same height. Everybody had identical weight. Everybody had exactly the same hair type. Everybody wore the same shoes. Everybody wore the same pants. Everybody looked identically. The only difference is that you could wear whatever shirt you want. There's still going to be bullying. There's still going to be the
Yes.
fact that you're going to get discriminated upon based on the fact that you're somehow quote unquote different than the normal people, if you want to call it that.
Yep. And unfortunately, it's part of our psychology to actually want to belong. So is actually pressure in our own minds to move us in that direction. So
So you're
yeah,
talking about that's a genetic component.
there's a genetic component.
And so we're fighting our genes when we're trying to level
Hmm.
the playing field, is what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying that
I don't know. I'm asking this a
what I'm
question.
saying is that there is actually a push within yourself to try to be part of the group. So it's nothing that can be done outside. You will always feel drawn to, I want to be in this group.
And it's no different than when you're a young child. I'm not saying you personally, but in
Yep.
general, that you end up picking on people because they are different,
Because
and
they are different.
everybody in the group will pick on that one individual.
Right. And that one individual, what I'm saying is has a drive to try to be part of the group, but some of us just don't know how.
Well, I can
Because
see
I
it,
was that kid.
right. Well, I can see if you have issues of learning,
Mm-hmm.
so you're placed into a classroom that's not where most people are. you're going to get picked on.
Right.
And the people who will do the picking, of course, are your peers, right? The people of
Hmm.
your age group.
Should be anyway. Sadie, of course, related a story where it wasn't
Yeah.
one
So
of her
I mean, it's
peers.
spread more wider than that. But I'm
Yeah.
saying, as a young person, and we can go even younger than middle school. Let's go to elementary. As a very young person that really doesn't know anything and hasn't really been taught yet, there's still this desire to pick on individuals. That's what I'm getting
Hmm.
at. This bullying aspect for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
For whatever reason, because they're not in the group. And then you try to become part of the group. And yeah, it's crazy, but we're social critters, so we want to be part of the group.
You know, Sadie, it's hard for me to comprehend fully of what it's like to go through all of those things, what you experienced and what others have experienced, and even worse, because I never experienced that stuff
Hmm.
myself. You know, nothing. And yes, I'm a white male, and so therefore I am, what do you call, privileged or whatever.
Privileged. Yeah.
And so but if I were somewhere else, and I've been somewhere else, and people had looked at me and actually made a remark at me, you're a gringo, right? You're a white guy. You don't
You don't
belong
belong
here.
here.
You don't speak our language. So I've been
Right.
discriminated just a little bit, right? So I can see where that happens. But yes, it's amazing. Like a field like science, I totally has nothing to do. Once again, the stress
that
act.
prides itself on not seeing seeing the individual based on the merit of their argument, and to find out that no, this stuff still exists.
Sadie, you mentioned the fact you'll know when we get there is because the playing field, is completely level,
Mhm.
and so, what I could make the argument. When we get there is when we don't have to do any double blind studies at all,
Right.
or
Or
evaluation,
we can know your name and still make a
a fair
fair
evaluation,
evaluation.
irregardless of where you're from, who you are, and so on.
But
Yeah,
unfortunately,
I
go ahead.
I think there would be an argument to say that there is going to be a point in the future where the double blind or the double blind anonymity application processes won't ever like be needed again. I just think that we may be in the point of in the time with things like observation time or even some things smaller like scholarships that are directed towards either women, other gender minorities, or ethnic identities. That there is, yes, a more of a preference more on the scholarship side of things, and the anonymity in the grants and observational time side of things. But I think that there's an argument to be made that they're almost necessary for building a time of, you know, understanding that, like a precedence, basically. And then once that precedence is built, um, then there's, no need for that question. It's like nobody thought that people would be able to fly until the
Until they
Wright
flew.
brothers did it. And
We've
now where we are, and especially at UND where people learn how to fly, there's no question as to whether people can fly.
we've got a
And so I
question.
think that that might
Sorry.
be the way. No, please.
We've got a question from S.J. Olson, I'm guessing. I hope I didn't mangle that. So, even in the most stressful times, how do you keep that positivity and keep going with your research or to continue to go for your dream goal? So, how do you basically keep yourself going when you're meeting all this resistance?
It's not easy. I can tell you that much. And for the viewers, I can say that there have been multiple times where I've come into both the offices of Rob and Dr. Barkhouse to have a bit of a sanity check. Is this am I crazy? Can I actually do something like this? But you can only rely on other people so much. And how I kind of regulate that in myself is I when things feel impossible, I do what is probably the most cliche thing in the world is I just go to YouTube and I will watch a a speech or a um I have a very like a very wonderful YouTube video of what it's called the universe in a blink of an eye. It's what the average length of the blink of an eye is, like a tenth of a second. Well, what happens in the universe in a tenth of a second? How many, stars will die? How many stars are born? How much closer does, the Milky Way get to Andromeda?
So,
How many tons of hydrogen does the sun burn in the blink of an eye? And it's revisiting that inspiration.
so
And
you're
it's those little things that I forget in
so
the
you
the
remind yourself of why
yeah.
you got into this in the first place and why you thought it was neat.
Yeah.
Advice I give to students all the time.
Yeah.
We got to
It could
remind
be
yourself.
something yeah, it could be something as little as like the other day when I'm, super stressed out about my research and my classes, and I make myself a cup of coffee, and to be fair, I make myself espresso brewed over milk. And every time it looks like the storm on Jupiter. And I just look at it and it's like, wow, this is like the nerdiest thing in the world, but this looks like the eye of Jupiter. And then it's that love that you have. It's I fell in love with physics, and much like a marriage, even when it gets really hard, at the end of the day I can still sit there and just be astounded by how much I love physics. And it's that love that like I try to see, and that will keep me going. But there's no shame if you ever need to say, hey, I don't think I can do it. Can you please just tell me I can do it, and to tell me just to keep going for today? And then there are always going to be people who are going to tell you that you can do that.
So, Sadie, you did provide some slides. So, Robert, if you want to go
Yeah.
to the next slide, this is one
Sure.
where you show participation not only from yourself but other members of our department that went to QWIP.
Yeah. Um so on what I'm guessing is the left side. It's the group photo. Those
Hmm.
are three of the four women that came to QWIP with us. There's only one person who wasn't pictured. Um we had a freshman, a two sophomores, a junior, and myself as a senior going, and so we were able to bring kind of the entire spectrum of the undergraduate degree to the Montana State University QIP site. That picture is actually at the planetarium. They have a new JWST um, little site there, and then on the right side is um, I got a cup for presenting my research and being able to um, be an inspiration, which is kind of odd to hear when you feel like you're a loser and you're stumbling through this degree kind of blind. um, but yeah, and I think there were 500 people just in our little region, which is North Dakota, Minnesota, Montana, Washington, and I think South Dakota. So then,
Hmm.
and there were at least 20 Q websites around the United States this year. So there was a lot of us.
Now, Sadie, I guess I'm not mistaken because we've talked about this that you do find inspiration in other females who have made it, if you like, if you want to call it that. And one of them is somebody that you guys heard during QWIP on the Zoom, I think you mentioned. Do you want to say a little bit more about that and what you got from that?
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to meet, I got to look at a Zoom screen of Dr. Jocelyn Bell Burnell. For those of you, if you're not familiar, Dr. Burnell was the woman who discovered the first pulsar, which is a pulsating radio star. It is basically a super compact object spinning um, at an extremely high rate. Um, they can be classified as neutron stars, um, but what makes them a pulsar is the energy beam, if you want to think of it, that is spinning around in a cone, intercepts Earth. And so we can see them flashing Some of them flash invisible, and some of them flash in longer wavelengths, like radio. Um, and she was looking at her observation sheet and saw a weird blip. And she spent the next, I think, 5 years doing even more observations and everything, and she found out it wasn't a mistake. Um, and unfortunately, Dr. Burnell, she was never recognized for her discovery of pulsars. Her research advisor at the time was the individual who was awarded the Nobel Prize for the discovery. But we got to hear about kind of her life, and she talked so much about imposter syndrome and what that felt like, but also how not being awarded the Nobel Prize has shown her that she can now, be recognized for other things rather than just a piece of metal, essentially, that
Hmm.
they give to people for who make amazing discoveries just doing what they love.
Well, if there's any person do you want to turn to look for an inspiration that maybe, especially at times when you're not feeling too well, there you go.
Yeah,
There's an
absolutely.
individual to look up to.
Mm-hmm. I'm.
And I mean, in science, that's the thing we try to emphasize people that are similar to you because people do look for inspirations.
Mm-hmm.
So you want teachers that are familiar or look the same as you do or seem to be the same. And you can look up on those teachers as, hey, I can be a teacher too. Then when I, are finished, when I
Right.
grow up, if you like, quote unquote, right?
You you got to find people, and yeah,
Yeah, well,
birds of a feather. We just were talking about that.
I mean, when I was in graduate school, I remember the numbers were around 10% of all faculty in physics and astronomy and astrophysics were female, 10%. And
Wow.
I think that number hasn't even changed to this day. And I've had conversations with other females, and I remember one in particular, I won't mention her name. She was a graduate student at the same time that I was a graduate student. And she told me she was ahead of me by a couple of years, so she was in the business of applying for jobs. And so she was looking around for postdocs as well as applying to faculty positions. And she told me once that she was, given an invitation, so she was on what we call a short list, given an invitation to go to this institution. And it was for a job as a faculty member, so it would be a tenure track assistant professor. And she went there, did the interview, the on campus interview, and then returned back to where I was. And she told me that she actually turned them down. And I said, why did you turn them down? Because typically, your career steps, you'd finish your graduate degree with a PhD. Then you'd probably, if you wanted to, go to a postdoc, one or two positions. Two is normal. And that's where you have your time in your life to just concentrate on research. You don't have to worry about trying to get money to support yourself because typically the person or place you're going to will support you fully. You don't have to worry about teaching or do administration, service type work. You just concentrate fully on your research. And so you want to kind of enjoy that part of your life. But here was an opportunity to bypass those steps and go right into becoming a professor. But she told me she declined the offer. And the reason why is because she got the feeling while she was talking to the department that was trying to hire her or hire somebody for the position that the only reason she was invited was because she was a female. Not how good her research is, not how well she could potentially teach, not how well she got along with others, but the fact that she was just a female and that department was trying to somehow satisfy a quote,
Yeah.
right? To say, hey, look, we have a female on our faculty, aren't we doing great? And because of that feeling, she said she didn't want to walk through the halls of the department in years to come and have other faculty members look at her and say, or thinking to themselves, the only reason you're here is
Yeah.
because you're a female. So she said, no, thank you, and didn't go.
Pardon.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's a
know.
tough call.
Yeah, that's very tough. And I've worked with some students. Um, Here's kind of an ad hoc student mentor who were, very worried. What if I only get somewhere because I am I identify with certain, ethnic identities, or what if I only get somewhere because I'm a gender minority? And I still I it's still something that's very hard to wrestle with. And so I'm sure that that couldn't have been an easy call. And I hope that I or any of the women that I work with never find themselves in that position, because I don't know what I would do in something like that.
Yeah, well, just to complete that story, this individual went on and had a and has a very successful career in doing research in astrophysics and in astronomy.
Cool.
So she could stand on her own,
Right. And she kind of
knowledge
showed it.
and expertise and so on. She didn't need to be given, a
Right.
handout, if you like. But I mean, I kind of think back, if I was in that situation, if somebody selected me only because I'm a male, only because I'm white, for example, only because I was born, let's say, in Canada, these kind of things, right? And say, okay, we want a white male Canadian for some reason, right? Maybe they want us to play hockey. I don't know, just kidding. But they select and said, this is why you're getting this job. And if I think about it, it's either do that or I end up with a job, let's say, driving for Uber or a taxi company somewhere. Not to say that that's nothing wrong with that job. I'm just saying that's not what my first love is.
Right.
I would probably take the job,
Hmm.
you know, even though knowing that I'm being discriminated against, or you're only here because of certain thing. Because in that sense, my foot is in the door, and I can then prove myself.
Right. And there's a certain level of that. You have to, that's what I was thinking. There's got to be a certain level of that you've got to take into consideration too. But in the end, it's a value judgment. What am I going to do? What's right for me? Do I want to charge that hill in the face of the gunfire, or do I want to, skirt around and come in from the backside?
Well, the other thing I was thinking, if you do take the hill, using your analogy,
Yeah.
and you're at the top waving the flag, you're in a place of authority. You could be at some
Yeah.
point. Then you can change the system
Right.
to make sure it never happens to anybody else who goes to that same institution.
Yep.
So
No, I
that's
agree.
kind of the way I think about it, right? And of course, like you mentioned, it's all personal. People can,
Mhm. And
make choices of their own. But that's how I kind of think about
and
it.
and we're not in that situation, so
Well, that's it. All right, we're biased. Everyone's
right,
biased, right?
right.
We're biased from your upbringing, from the type of environment that you came from, et cetera, et cetera. So
Hmm.
from my point of view, that's how I would address it.
Right.
But of course, others not necessarily. It's just too bad that we have to, especially in 2024, and we're still talking about issues that's been around for literally thousands and thousands of years.
Hmm.
And it's just amazing. And you figure that if you want to blame old white males, for example, for this problem, some of those old white males have daughters. And so
And
once you have a daughter, how could you discriminate against your own daughter? You
right.
see? And yet somehow
And yet
that doesn't fix it.
it doesn't fix it, and somehow they do.
Yeah. They forget
Somehow they
about that.
do.
Oh, I don't think of my daughter as in this way,
Right.
but I think of all other females in that way. You
Right.
see? That's kind of, I guess that's how they think in their brain so they can sleep at night.
And some of them just do think of their daughters that way.
Yeah. It's
So
amazing when you think about it. I
it
mean,
is.
I have a daughter and a son. And so
Mhm.
I kind of am a little sensitive to this, right? What is she going to experience? So she's in high school now. What are the things that she's being told? Does she have a teacher like Sadie
Right.
who's discouraging her from going into a STEM field or something like that? I hope not. And I hope that she's open enough to tell me when something like that happens, but I don't know for sure. You
If
see?
if something like that happened, all I can say is let me know, because I'll hold them for you.
Right. Now, Robert, we don't condone violence.
Okay, we
on
don't
this
condone
podcast.
violence. Right. Right.
But anyway, Sadie, I mean, everything that you've talking about, I know some of it can be very difficult. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to opening up a bit and telling
Of
your
course.
story, because that's how other people will know what's going on, right?
Right.
People need to say things. People need to speak out. These
Yeah,
Absolutely.
issues.
Go ahead.
especially with things like imposter syndrome, and when imposter syndrome convinces you that you're the only person in the room who feels that way, you, like Rob was telling you, that psychological want and primal need to fit in with the majority makes it, it convinces you that, oh, I'm the only one that deals with that. But
And
you know
And in general, it's
vulnerability.
just the opposite. You know,
Exactly.
everybody in the room is dealing with that. So,
Exactly. I tell you right now, viewers, everybody has imposter syndrome in one way or the other, and if anybody tells you that they don't, they're lying to you and themselves.
Well, we've
And
even had
it's
Nobel
very
Prize winners state that they have imposter syndrome. And for those who don't know what that means you get the feeling like everyone else is better than you around you and that you're not worthy somehow of your
and
achievements.
it's just a matter of time before they figure out how much of a loser you really are.
Right? Yeah, right. That you're hiding things,
It's
putting
you're
on a big
hiding,
fake, you're faking it.
you're faking it, right?
Yeah. But
I
unfortunately,
remember sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say I remember reading that Buzz Aldrin was invited to a banquet. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but it's for like the trailblazers of the century and with poets and you you know all artists and scientists, and he went with a journalist, and the journalist said that he was talking about, I don't know why they invited me here. I'm just some guy who did what I was told. I didn't do anything important.
Right. Well, there you go.
So yeah, I
Hmm.
the biggest part, I see that Wonder Goon in the chat said you just described my personality. Well, Wonder Goon, I can tell you that it's okay to have imposter syndrome. I've come to the realization that as scientists, we like to run our lives as experiments. And when we have confounding variables that pop up in our experiments, we try our best to eliminate them. And as someone who has spent the better time of 3 years trying to eliminate my imposter syndrome from my life, I've come to the realization that it's just one of those things that you have to live with, in the sense that you can give yourself permission not to feel like you have to change it. Think of it as like an accuracy, like uh, tolerance, like the plus or minus.
And
You're gonna feel a certain way, plus or minus a little bit of imposter syndrome,
yep.
but that's
And
just how the way it's gonna
on
be.
that note, I've got to stop us though. It's time for us to go for the week.
The
Um,
hour's gone already,
the
Robert?
hour's gone already.
Well, Sadie, thank you very much for doing this. And we would like to have you back on very soon if you're okay with that to talk about maybe about some of the
Absolutely.
research that you've been doing.
Absolutely. I love to talk about my research. We wanted to talk about the Rosetta telescope today. We didn't get around to it, but I would love to talk about more space and more telescopes.
Great, thank you. And
Thank you.
for those of you who may
Absolutely.
be interested in coming to the University of North Dakota to partake in learning about STEM field or about the arts or anything, please consider coming to UND. You can do so in person on campus, or if you like, of course, you can take courses online.
Come meet Sadie.
Exactly. Come speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So our next podcast will be on Tuesday, February the 13th, same time, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we always leave you with a quote. So Robert and
Okay.
Sadie,
What we got this time?
today's quote is from Marie Curie.
Whoop.
You see, I was prepared. And the quote is, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less." Thank you very much for watching.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.